We were growing up, if you like, with Lou Grade, who just, when we first met him, had just come into Associated Television. And he was a fantastic entrepreneur. He was the old-time salesman.
Jerry was listening to the radio, his car radio, about this mining disaster in Germany, where about 20 trapped miners were caught in a deep mine where it had filled with water. He thought about this, and really, almost off the cuff, he came up with this idea to Lou Grade. It would be an organisation tentatively called International Rescue. We got this family. The father was an astronaut. They're millionaires, and they've got fantastic machines which can fly to different parts of the world and rescue people. It was a very clever idea.
The Tracy family were modelled after Bonanza, which was the top show at the time, and inspired the idea of having more than one hero, all the brothers. Each had different personalities, which of course gave writing material more scope.
As far as we're concerned, the only good publicity is no publicity.
And it sold in 60-odd countries throughout the world, so it worked.
Hi there, Penelope. Well, how'd it go?
F-A-B.
Well done, Penelope.
Well, it's been a hectic time for all of us.
I was sort of always pushing Lou Grade at the time, to do movies, because we started up wanting to do movies, and here we are doing puppets, you know. And then one day he introduced us to the film executive and said, I think we can do a movie. And of course we jumped to the chance because it gave us a bigger budget and more scope for effects and so on.
Grade had always said to Jerry Anderson when they first discussed Thunderbirds that these TV shows were so good they should be feature movies. So when United Artists suddenly said, we want some feature film versions of these TV shows, Lou Grade pushed Thunderbirds towards them. And Jerry balked at the idea. I mean, he always wanted to make feature-length films, but here was an opportunity to get Thunderbirds stateside and really get it big.
And how about you? There's something wrong with your face. He's got a gun.
Yeah, I did 6, I think, of the series, and then the series ended, in actual fact. And then Jerry got the contract from United Artists, and he asked me if I would do it. I jumped at it because it was a feature film and it was big screen and everything else. It was the glamour.
Jerry was always very much involved in running around, sorting out the TV shows, seeing that the next wave of TV shows was coming along. It seemed a perfect opportunity to say to Sylvia, you know, you take over the movie.
In the very early days, we were so humble that the laboratories didn't want to come and pick up our brushes. And here we had a decent budget, and we could even go out and do some live action outside. By the time we got to Thunderbirds, we had moved to a whole unit that was totally new, and that was being used for special effects. So the whole thing was a mini, like a Disney studio, if you like. It was sheer luxury to us.
All the props and the models and everything was still sitting around at Slough from the old Thunderbirds TV show. It was very easy for the guys just to go back and make them. I think the whole wonderful thing about the Jerry Anderson shows is that they're handled in a very tongue-in-cheek way. I think there's a lot of fun had with the characters. The characters themselves are larger than life. After all, we've got these puppets walking around with these huge heads that are bigger than their bodies. So the whole thing's caricature right from the start.
I don't think there's much point in looking for survivors, Parker.
No, m'lady.
The brilliant thing is that the scripts were written very seriously, but with the kind of an undertone of fun.
I'll be down right away.
F.A.B.
Penelope, we've got to go.
Oh, Alan, must we?
Nobody feels embarrassed watching them, whatever age they are, because they can either laugh at them or they can take them seriously. Mum and Dad can sit there and watch it, and they can enjoy it. They're not sitting there thinking, oh, I'm watching a kid's show. They're enjoying it with the kids.
Safety belts on, m'lady.
If you think about children, they want to watch James Bond. James Bond's not a child's show, but they want to watch it. They want to watch what adults want. We never think we're making children's shows. We always think we're making family entertainment.
The Thunderbirds had a lot of things going for them. The boys loved all the exploding rockets and machines and monsters and whatever. The girls more favoured the puppetry.
Thank you, Parker. I've had my own thoughts on the matter.
They're like dolls, you know, so they really like that kind of aspect of it.
Mach 1.4.
It had hardware, And it had software. Lady Penelope had fantastic costumes, which is why I think it worked.
You mean you're going to take me to the Swinging Star? Gee.
After that brilliant performance, I think that's the least you deserve.
We tried to keep as near as possible to the immediate future.
Leaving Earth's atmosphere.
They were not of now, but tomorrow, but not so outrageous that you couldn't believe it.
I think the atmosphere would be breathable, but too thin to sustain life as we know it.
There's a good reason for giving the shows an American feel. We had no British astronauts.
I have a feeling that we may encounter life as we don't know it.
Again, it was the pace and the feel of the whole thing.
Brad, skip the countdown. We're lifting off.
Her big influence was definitely on style of the characters. Jerry's was very much on storytelling, sound, hardware, and the aggression of the show.
Radio control failure. I can't hold her.
What's up?
Maybe it picked up on 60s styles in some way, maybe it reflected the 60s period, but when it came down to it, the shows were very sophisticated. They blew us away when we watched them back in 1964. We just couldn't believe it. How do they do any of this stuff? It was the most amazing thing we'd ever seen.
We had to start off with a bang. We were brought up in the school that you've got to grab your audience in the first minute.
Here we go.
So we liked explosions. Have you seen the shows? We have to have an explosion.
I know how you boys feel. I guess you're raring to go.
When Tracy says, I want you there and I want you there now,
This is what we do.
you know you're going into action. It's like watching a war film with all the preparation, and then suddenly all the ships are at sea and the planes start to take off, and suddenly the music starts and you're off, and everybody gets a tingle because that's the magic moment.
But it seemed to be right somehow. You had to create a danger situation.
Central Control, this is 0X. Emergency.
Something explodes or whatever.
Unless we can get the crew and passengers out before that aircraft hits the ground, they are all doomed men.
And then you bring in your characters because it's international rescue.
How you doing, Thunderbird 2?
Alan isn't through yet, and we're dangerously near the ground.
Now, Scott! Now!
Next year, it's 40 years since the first episode of Thunderbirds went on television, and the movies are nearly 40 years old as well, Thunderbirds Are Go and Thunderbirds 6. They still appeal to people because new generations have come up identifying with those characters.
To Alan, the hero of the day.
The popularity is just phenomenal. We still get letters today. Grandparents and so on say, well, I grew up with this, and I used to sit and watch it with my dad and stuff like that. So it was a family show, which is hard to find now, I think.
Okay, boys, Thunderbirds Are Go.
We were young filmmakers who really wanted to make great big movies, but it doesn't happen like that. And so now, almost by accident, we come into this style. And we'd gathered around a group of people, art students and so on, that were in the spirit of the thing. It was like a big family, extended family. And I think it shows. If you've got heart in what you're doing, I think it shows on the screen. And you see, the lovely thing about it was no one else was doing it.
At that time, television was all being experimented with, really. And everyone was keen and anxious to get everything right, because there'd been nothing like it before.
Super marionation. It's a glamorous word that's made up by Jerry because they were truly marionettes, they're not puppets. And puppets, by and large, are something you put your hand inside. Marionettes are something on the end of strings. At least that's the way I understand it.
I think they dismissed us quite a bit in America because they were puppets, But yes, I'm afraid so. It was like all of us sitting around and saying, we don't want to talk about puppets as such. So if we say dum-da-da-dum, MGM if you like, widescreen, super marionation, that's how it came about.
Jerry very cleverly coined the phrase and called it super marionation, which was his way of saying, this is a very different kind of puppet show, folks. There were puppet shows on TV at that time and they were quite popular, but they were very basic. He wanted to be more sophisticated about it. Super marionation. You bring it up on the screen in Thunderbirds and it's kind of in a scope look, and people just get very excited about it.
The type of puppetry that we were doing was being rather invented as we went along. When you're up 8 foot high on a bridge and you're just looking down on the top of a puppet's head, you can't really see very well what it's doing. So an invention was made so that we could see exactly what the camera saw from down below.
How do you operate a puppet that you can't see, and it has to work and react to other characters in the show? We had to find a way of the puppeteers being able to see what was happening through the camera. So they knew which way to turn the heads, how far to lean it forward. So you put a camera, a small video camera in the eyepiece, and the puppeteers would have monitors on huge great stands right up near the top where they're working, above the puppets. Whilst it was a pretty awful picture, it worked. And on top of that, they had to get a system where they could flip the picture because they're seeing a mirrored image. They had to flip the image completely so that when they turned to the right, it turned to the right the way they were looking at it. It was complicated, but you couldn't have made any of the puppet series without it.
We'd operate the puppets to a pre-recorded dialogue.
In the early days, in order to get the mouth to react to the recorded tape, you'd be a split second behind with the reaction, with the puppeteers pulling the mouth string. So you never got quite in sync. And of course, editors went totally balmy. But as time went on, we worked on a solenoid in the head that was what we call the puppet brain, that would react to the pulses on the tape. We recorded first, did a bit of editing on that, played it back, and pressed the right button, and then it would be automatic.
But wouldn't you like another drink?
Thank you, Captain, but no.
You'd put these amazing puppets in the sets, switch the tape on, and the pulses would go down the cables to each of the individual puppets. They'd speak to one another.
Stand by.
We used to have a problem with the puppets. Puppets couldn't pick anything up.
Here we go.
You can wrap a puppet's hand over a lever, but you can't get it to enter and wrap over that lever, because you couldn't do that with a puppet. You had to pose the hand into the gripped position, put it onto the lever or the button, and pull it or push it. By using live action, we can actually get the drama of the hand coming in and grabbing hold of it and pulling the lever or pushing the button. It was so much easier. But it gave us a problem because everything they picked up, everything we did, we had to build to a full-size scale. So where we'd built it as a puppet scale, we now had to reproduce the whole thing as a live action scale. But obviously it gave us the opportunity to try and make everything a little more natural.
Lady Penelope speaking.
Jerry was always concerned that you can't make these puppets walk very comfortably. They do look a bit awkward on screen when you try and make them walk. In most of the shows, they're always sitting at little consoles, swinging back and forth.
They're all going out tonight to celebrate.
No, thanks.
Because the puppets were fairly naturalistic, a walk is very difficult to do with a couple of strings. With just one string, you can't get it to look like a natural walk. You can make a funny walk for a comic puppet, but it somehow didn't work on these ones.
Tintin, come here a minute.
The only thing about the strange sort of puppetry techniques they involved was, of course, that when a puppet got to a doorway, of course, it couldn't walk through. In a lot of Thunderbird shows, you see Jeff saying, well, thanks and bye, and the guest, you'd hear the feet, and then the guest would be standing at the door going, bye, Jeff, because he could never walk through the door.
Everybody okay?
But sometimes from the, say, the waist of the puppet up, they could actually operate them with a rod from underneath. So they could make them do that and look like they're going through a door. And that technique was employed a little bit. Kind of early Muppets kind of technology, I suppose.
As everybody knows, we couldn't walk them. They didn't move too well once they started to move from A to B.
However, rules were made to be broken.
Thanks, Father.
The launches gave us a very good reason to manipulate the puppets and move them from A to B, but without them ever walking. So everything's designed around the fact that they can't walk, so therefore whatever they go on has to move. So every single launch sequence, whether it be Thunderbird 2, Thunderbird 1, they're all geared to transporting the characters as opposed to the characters transporting themselves.
Okay, boys, Thunderbirds are go.
One of the important points about the movies are, of course, they're made in widescreen. And this again goes to this whole idea about TV. You know, TV's very restricted in those days. We have widescreen TV now, so it doesn't matter. But back in the 60s, we all remember these little small 4x3 screens. So in a sense, it seemed like it was quite a good idea that if we've got this TV show and we want to make it look better on the big screen, let's make it in widescreen, which is what they did with Thunderbirds Are Go and Thunderbird 6.
The biggest thing was how did we photograph it? And simply because we wanted to do CinemaScope. We wanted a scope format, a letterbox format. But we were dealing with special effects, and special effects couldn't handle Panavision because Panavision are anamorphic lenses. They're not suited to special effects, or they weren't then. So we had to use a spherical system. But we still wanted to go for the scope. So we used a system which was out then called Technoscope, which effectively was really 16mm. It wasn't perfect because you only used half of a 35mm frame, but you used the whole width of it right to the perforations. It gave it a cinematic look, as opposed to what we're used to on television, which is just 4:3. To stand up for the big screen. The puppets had to be that little bit better, the costumes had to be, you know, everything stands up, it's under a microscope, so you have to work really hard to make every aspect of the film, in the lighting, you know, the music had to be grander. Everything about it has to move up a gear.
I have to say, the thing that brought it to life, apart from our wonderful team of sculptors and puppeteers and so on, art direction, but the special effects. Derek Meddings, who was a genius.
I would say he was indispensable rather than essential. Derek had been with Jerry way before I was there. He was doing the very early series. But he had a fantastic eye for special effects and miniatures. And he could do everything. He could paint the backings, he could build the models, so he knew whatever team he put together, he knew exactly what they had to do. And he would design 4 or 5 different scales because he knew that this particular sequence would have to take a close-up or a long shot or a miniature or a minute one. So he had to make everything just that much better to stand up for the big screen. He had to make explosions that could be contained within a small area but look enormous. So he used high-speed photography. And so we were shooting at about 125 frames a second maximum. And not only that, they had to use very small apertures. They were shooting at, 16 and 22 f-stops, that is, which to give them the depth of field. So the light they had to pour on was enormous. I mean, if you went on to one of the special effects sets when he was doing big explosions, the lighting was unbearable. You would just literally faint with the heat. They were shot on very small stages. To my knowledge, I think the backings were about 16 to 18 foot maximum. If you make the explosion too big, it goes out of shot. So therefore, you've got to make very powerful explosions small, and that's difficult. So obviously Derek knew exactly what he was doing with those. He would do a lot of what they call windbacks in the camera. He would shoot one part of the film, then he would wind the film back in the camera and re-expose it again. Particularly for things like stars. Let's say he was doing explosions in space. He would do the explosion against black, jet black, and then he would wind the camera back and put the star field in. So it was all on the one piece of film. And then he may wind it back again and put the spaceship in. And then he'd wind it back again and put the moon in, or the planet. I've seen them do about 8 windbacks on one shot. That way, nothing had to go to the lab, and when you saw the rushes the next day, you saw the shot as it was.
One of the great things about the show, obviously, is the visual side of it and the way the shows looked and the way they felt. But of course, this was all sort of made it more exciting by Barry Gray's music. Jerry had got Barry Gray working on the very early shows with him, and he liked Barry Gray's music.
If you have 2 actors, good actors, sitting in a room talking, you can hold it. You've got a storyline, you're looking at the expressions. Bear in mind that the puppets, they're expressionless, basically. One expression. They couldn't hold the screen, just puppets talking to each other. So to counter that, we had music, which brings the whole thing to life. It had to compensate for the deficiencies of the puppets.
He used to use a big orchestra, huge orchestra. I mean, he used a 70-piece orchestra on Thunderbirds Are Go. He had that ability to make a big fat sound, and that gave all the special effects, particularly, it gave them a lot of weight. Because if you see them mute, they're flying and they can be a little bit amusing. But as soon as the music comes in with them and the sound effects, then suddenly they have purpose and they have weight.
Barry Gray really liked marching band type music. I mean, it was, again, had a military feel to it, which was rather exciting. He came up with these kind of marches, which helped this kind of militaristic look that they had as well.
Thunderbirds! Are Go!
you just can't have Thunderbirds without that theme music. And that was Barry Gray's genius, I think.
Excitement is go. Adventure is go. Danger is go. Thunderbirds are go. Now, on the big screen, in Technicolor and Technoscope, Thunderbirds are go. The incredible Tracy family, secretly known as International Rescue, again blast into action from their secret base on an uncharted island somewhere in the Pacific. Thunderbirds Are Go. You'll streak through uncharted worlds of adventure. You'll journey to the Swinging Star, nightclub of the stars. You'll share the danger as the Thunderbirds battle for survival against the rock snakes of the dark planet. Now, on the big screen, in Technicolor and Technoscope, a brand new adventure that takes you where you've never been before. Thunderbirds Are Go!